I'm Oleg Novak, this is Chasing Cars, and times have changed a lot since the Mazda 3 first went on sale in Australia. Believe it or not, there once was a time when this was Australia's most popular car. In fact, it was this car that dethroned the Holden Commodore in 2011 at the top of Australia's sales charts. But fast forward to today, and the Mazda 3 was in 2023 Australia's 36th most popular car, selling less than a quarter of what it sold back in 2012. So buyer tastes have definitely changed, and that's through no fault of the Mazda 3, which is arguably in many ways better than it's ever been. But looking at Mazdas sold in Australia, this is their fifth most popular car behind, you guessed it, 3 SUVs and a ute. So what role does the Mazda 3 play today? Should you consider buying one? And will you be rewarded for going against the SUV grain by getting a Mazda 3? We're going to revisit the car today. We're going to go for a spin in this G20 Evolve hatch to find out an answer to all of those questions. But before we do that, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell below.
Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct.
So 5 years into its run, this current generation Mazda 3 would all be pretty familiar with its design, which is still available in both hatch and sedan forms. Now, it's always traded off its design as one of its key selling points, and I think that it's dated really well. I think it's holding up really well. Personally, I'm a big fan of the hatch. I know the hatch, particularly at the rear, has been quite polarizing. So let us know in the comments section down below, would you go the hatch? Would you go the sedan? Now, while the hatch has been a bit polarizing in terms of its design, the interior has received quite a lot of praise. So let's hop inside and see if the 4th gen Mazda 3 interior is still holding up nicely after 5 years. A good design stands the test of time, and I think 5 years on, the Mazda 3 interior still really impresses. This is a really beautifully designed cabin, and it's actually not only a pleasure to touch and interact with, but it's also just a pleasure to look at. And I think compared to a lot of new car designs that go for the sticking on an iPad approach, I think this one's actually going to be a bit more timeless than that. But there are some downsides to it as well. So let's look at some of the positives and some of the negatives. And they're not going to be to everyone's taste. Some people might love the approach to this interior, whereas some people might not. And there's already been some criticism to some elements, which I'm sure a lot of viewers might be familiar with. But in terms of the basics, the ergonomics are still really good. Everything feels really nice. You've got a really good driving position. I don't have electric seats here in the Evolve. You'll need to step up to the Touring to get the power seats, but it's still really easy to find a good driving position. I really like the steering wheel. The dials are really crisp and clear and simple. Some people might think that they're a bit outdated, but at the same time, I kind of liken them to an analog watch. They just do the job and they do it well. So I like them for that reason personally. As well as that, you've got other elements like really good tactile feelings to all of the controls, like the climate controls you've got here. You've got a traditional gear shifter, always a fan of that, really easy to use, just does the job well. You've still got the annoying gloss piano black here, which I wish Mazda wouldn't use because it gets so scratched up and dusty and every car reviewer complains about it, but hey, they're persisting with it. But other than that, it's a really nice interior to sit in. However, there are some downsides, and it's not going to be to everyone's taste. For example, this is quite a dark interior. You've got dark leather, you've got dark seats, you've got a dark roof liner over here. So you do feel extremely cocooned. And what adds to that kind of cocooned feeling is the design of the car. So you've got a pretty substantial restriction to the rear visibility over there thanks to the exterior design. So therefore there's a bit of a price you pay for the style with this car. If you aren't a confident driver, that's just something to bear in mind in terms of when you're reversing or changing lanes. You're going to have to rely a bit more on your own spatial awareness and the blind spot monitoring as well. Aside from that, the driving position is pretty low. It's a bit sporty. Personally, I like that. But again, in terms of what SUVs offer, like the Mazda CX-3 and CX-30, slightly higher ride height, slightly better visibility, less low of a seating position. There's a lot of people that won't like the feeling of the Mazda 3, but then there's going to be others that really like what it offers. Now, in terms of tech, one of the big things in the Mazda 3 G20 we're in today is that it's equipped with the Vision package. So that brings a suite of additional features. Notably in the interior, we've got a 360-degree camera and we've got a bigger 10.25-inch infotainment screen over here. You would be familiar, historically in the 4th generation Mazda 3's run, there's been a pretty substantial amount of criticism from some quarters about the lack of a touch screen for the media system. This one is now touch screen, so you can interact with Apple CarPlay by touching the screen, but it is important to note that given the design of the car, the screen's quite far away. So I don't know, I personally will be using the Corolla over here, which a lot of people aren't a fan of, but I actually really like, especially given when you're driving the car at high speeds. I think it's safer to be interacting with this to navigate through the menu as opposed to trying to hit buttons when you're on the go like that. But again, not to everyone's taste in that regard. In my opinion, I reckon this is overall a really nice blend of old world ergonomics and tactility and simplicity and things that just work with some new world tech that hasn't gone too far. That's what I reckon. Not everyone's going to agree, so let us know in the comments section down below what you think of the Mazda 3's interior and its tech. That's one element where maybe you're not going to feel quite that premium feel of the Mazda 3s. When you do shut the doors, they do feel a bit light and tinny, so the car does punch above its weight in most areas, but that is one area it reminds you are in a mainstream hatchback. Now, in terms of the rear seats, positives and negatives, let's start with the negatives, and that is that the cocoon theme definitely continues. It's quite dark. The window space is limited here for rear seat passengers. But at the same time, the seats are actually really comfy. The materials over here, you've got soft touch here and here, which is good as well. So they haven't skimped out with going to a whole heap of hard plastics at the back. So what about in terms of space and comfort for me at 183 centimeters tall? Well, it's pretty good. So first of all, the seats, they're really comfortable, so they're a nice place to be. Despite the cocoon kind of nature, it's a pleasant place to sit. In terms of space, it's pretty good for me. So this is behind my own driving position and I'm sitting quite far back. Knee room is okay, I fit. In terms of leg room, that's pretty good. Toe room, not too bad. Under thigh support, maybe could be a bit more, but overall I find the seats, as I mentioned, quite good. Headroom, I just fit, which is pretty good. In terms of other amenities, now you don't have USB-C or USB-A connections here at the back. You do have 2 rear air vents. You don't have a map pocket on this side, but you've got a map pocket on that side, and you've got a center armrest with 2 cup holders. So overall, while the cocoon theme continues in the back of the Mazda 3, it's not too bad a place to be. Okay, let's open the manual tailgate on the Mazda 3 to check out the boot space, and that reveals 295 litres of boot space in here. So that is not massive by any means. It is more than a base spec Corolla, which has 217 litres of boot space, but it is considerably less than a Kia Cerato or a Hyundai i30. So if boot space is a priority in your small car, that is definitely a consideration. You've got a relatively high load lip in here as well, but at least you do get a space saver spare wheel. So that is one good thing about the boot space in the Mazda 3. All right, so let's chat running costs for the Mazda 3 G20 Evolve hatch. So this thing claims fuel usage of 5.9 litres per 100 kilometres. Over my time with the car, I've averaged just over 8.1 litres per 100 kilometres. Now, granted, that's included some pretty spirited country road driving as we've been testing the car out, but it does accept E10 fuel and minimum 91 octane fuel as well. Now, in terms of servicing, you're looking at servicing every 12 months or every 15,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. And over 5 years, servicing is going to cost you just over $2,100 as well. Now, in terms of warranty, you're looking at an unlimited kilometer warranty for 5 years as well, thanks to Mazda. In terms of safety, the Mazda 3 has a 5-star ANCAP crash safety rating tested in 2019, and it comes equipped with a suite of active safety and driver assistance features, including a suite of airbags, autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, driver attention alert, lane keep assist, rear cross traffic alert, a reverse camera, traffic sign recognition, rear parking sensors, and radar cruise control with stop and go. The vision pack on this G20 Evolve also scores additional features like front parking sensors, front cross traffic alert, and a driver monitoring system as well. So in the 5 years that the current generation of the Mazda 3 has been around, while the small car landscape has changed quite a lot, the Mazda 3 hasn't actually changed that much. It looks pretty much exactly the same as it did when it first came out, but what has changed is the lineup. So Mazda has streamlined it significantly. So the X20 Skyactiv X Estina model has been axed, all the mild hybrid models have been axed, and as well as that, they've also axed every manual option across the entire lineup as of last year as well. So now the only options that you have when you're buying a Mazda 3, apart from what spec you would like and how specified and packed with features you want your car to be, the next choice is just whether you want a sedan or a hatch, or whether you want the 2 litre or the 2.5 litre. We're in the 2 litre, so how does the 2 litre go 5 years into its current generation? Well, overall, I think that the 2 litre actually goes quite well. So just around town, it's got plenty of enough power for just standard commuting around urban areas and around the city. it's actually quite a quiet and refined vehicle as well, which is another good thing about it too. When you do want a bit more poke out of the car and you do want to get moving quickly, you do really have to rev it out. It is a naturally aspirated engine, so I guess you might have some people that find this maybe outdated tech because, you know, it doesn't have a turbocharger, so you don't have that low down torque that a turbocharged vehicle would have. It doesn't have the instantaneous response of electrification. So some people might not like that, but at the same time, I think it's got plenty of enough power around town and perfectly adequate for most people's needs. The other flip side to the argument against this engine is that it's relatively proven tech. It doesn't have the complication of additional components like a turbo, so in terms of buying a vehicle with a relatively proven record, then this one would be pretty easy to recommend in that regard. When you do need to get this engine moving, you do need to rev it out quite a bit, but at the same time, that's quite fun. It sounds quite good, and you definitely get the best performance out of it at higher revs, which is natural given it is a naturally aspirated engine. But overall, it's quite a nice unit, and it pairs well with a 6-speed automatic, which overall during my time with the car, I found it to be a relatively intuitive unit, generally finding the right gear for you to be in, and again, quite a faithful transmission paired with this engine as well. Now, if you do want more power, you have the option of stepping up to the 2.5 litre engine. So the 2 litre, it's got 114 kilowatts, 200 newton meters of torque, and the 2.5 litre has 139 kilowatts and 252 newton meters of torque. So obviously you've got that option there if you do want more power, but again, for most people's needs, I think the 2 litre is more than adequate. So what about the steering, ride and handling? Well, again, the Mazda 3 has a bit of duality, which some people may love and other people may not love, depending on what you're after in a small car. In terms of the steering, it's been commented on before, and I'd tend to agree, it does feel a bit heavier than some units around town at low speeds, so that's just something to bear in mind. But when you are getting the car moving, when you're on a country road, for example, when you get to enjoy using the steering a bit more, it really comes alive. It feels quite communicative. There's a semblance of feel and feedback as much as you can probably get in a mainstream car, and it's quite a really engaging car to pilot through a set of bends. In terms of other elements like the handling, it feels like the chassis is actually quite communicative, and it's really quite an enjoyable car and satisfying to drive in a more spirited way. That said, this is a commuter car. It is not a sports car, so that's something to bear in mind in that regard, because ultimately it seems to be tuned slightly more towards sportiness. So for example, the ride, definitely a bit on the firmer side. Big jolts, you'll probably feel them in the cabin, and you generally feel what's going on beneath you. So if you're after a plush ride experience, that won't be this car. Furthermore, in terms of the handling, the car feels quite planted. So when you are on a windy road, it really does enjoy going around snaking through corners quite well, and feels like it's got really pretty decent body control for what's a mainstream hatch. But not only that, on the freeway it also feels quite planted as well, and overall just has a feeling of a refined, well-engineered vehicle. But for me personally, based on my needs, I thought that the ride was perfectly adequate, and in context of the whole package of this car, in terms of what it delivers, in terms of its driving experience and the ride combined, I thought it was overall a really nice package. But again, it depends on what you're after, because on the flip side, you don't have quite as much practicality, the visibility isn't quite as good, it's a relatively dark interior, you sit relatively low, the ride is a bit firmer, and the steering's slightly heavier. So some people might look at this car and think that actually it doesn't do that great a job of what a mainstream hatch should do. But then there's another segment of the market who might actually look at it and think that actually it does the hatch thing. It might not do it the best of other hatches, but it does it, and at the same time it delivers something that has a bit more style and a bit more enjoyment to the drive experience than normal. So I guess what could make the Mazda 3 perhaps a bit more compelling, potentially, given some of its compromises, is maybe if it had a more compelling hybrid offering. So for example, the Corolla has a very compelling hybrid. The i30 now has a hybrid in the sedan form. The Mazda 3, they've axed the mild hybrids, which I don't think really counted, but if the Mazda 3 had a really compelling hybrid, that would definitely at least give it an extra point that would mean that it's stylish, fun to drive, and it would have the benefit of quite good fuel usage as well. So unfortunately it doesn't, but that's definitely something that could potentially make the package more appealing. Ultimately, what is interesting about the Mazda 3 is that when it was at the peak of its game in terms of sales back in 2012, when it sold just over 45,000 units, is that at that time it was operating in a small car category that had 31 different small cars competing in the category. In 2023, it had 11 cars in total competing in that category. So again, that goes to show just how much the small car segment has shrunk in that time. So in some ways, the Mazda 3 is a survivor. And while not everyone may like what it offers, pointing out some of its flaws, there is a type of buyer, albeit probably a diminishing segment, that would really appreciate what it offers in terms of offering something that does the commuter thing, but does it with just a bit more style and a bit more fun than other models. And ultimately, while it might not be for everyone, the fact that the Mazda 3 does offer that and still offers that and that it exists is a really good thing for consumers. Choice is really good, and the alternative would be that this just becomes another interchangeable mainstream SUV along with other cars. So hopefully that is something that can continue for a while yet for Mazda. The Mazda 3 provides something pretty unique in this segment, and I think that's a really good thing for what I think is still a really good car 5 years into its current generation. So there you have it, 5 years into its current generation, and I reckon the Mazda 3 is still a bit of a peach, but for the right type of buyer. Now, it's going to be super interesting to see which direction Mazda takes the 3 in the future, whether it's going to lean into a more niche type of proposition or whether Mazda takes a different direction as well. That's something I'm looking forward to following closely. But in the meantime, those are just my thoughts. Would love to know what you have to think. So let us know in the comments section down below what you think of the Mazda 3, how it's holding up 5 years into its current generation. Would you take the sedan? Would you take the hatch, the 2-litre, the 2.5? And which grade you reckon is the best value? Is it the G20 Evolve that we've got here today? Let us know in the comments section down below. While you're there, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.